Australia has joined the growing number of countries who believe that government policy making needs to be more rigorous. If we could ask all of those at the back to take a seat, please. Australia has joined the growing ranks of countries trying to bring a greater degree of rigour to government policy making. And one of the ways in which that's being attempted in Australia, I say attempted, we can form a view later on whether those attempts are successful and to what extent. But following the experience or the experiment of the Blair New Labor government in the UK, where a whole emphasis on policy making went to policy making following a more rigorous process, whether it was through cost-benefit analysis, through research projects, through the establishment of innumerable consultation processes using royal commissions and white papers and green papers. Indeed, it reached a stage in one entire session of Parliament where there was just no legislation, but there were something like 32 separate inquiries going on, and that the whole of the machinery of government had fallen into a form of paralysis. Well, it's made up for it since, and that the output in legislation and regulation and things is now measured in the wheelbarrow fulls per month, whereas before it was only in the bucket fulls per month. And the question of whether that's superior or not, it's too soon to say. But one thing that's clear, and that is that governments in Australia are taking that same approach. Last year, in April last year, the Prime Minister, in one particular speech, spoke of the need for evidence bases for policy making. And since then, the Productivity Commission has been something of a leader in this discussion, and that many of us who deal with governments, and this applies also to our conversations with regulators, are often challenged with this notion of the adequacy of evidence around some course of action that we might be urging. Well, perhaps it's not quite of the scale of the emissions trading scheme or even of the national broadband network, but many of these same issues apply to smaller things as well. We're really delighted to be able to explore this issue in a little bit more depth this afternoon, and we're going to do that through the kind participation of Robert Fitzgerald from the Productivity Commission. Many of us will have known Robert over many, many years in his many roles, many in the community sector, as well as more recently as a commissioner at the Productivity Commission. And following Robert's opening remarks, Abel Rizvi, Deputy Secretary in the Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy, will make some observations too. That department is one that is probably one of the most policy intensive around at the moment, with some of the largest challenges and debates going on. And it'll be interesting to firstly to gain the input of these two speakers. We then have a panel made up of a number of people from both academic backgrounds and consumer advocacy backgrounds to discuss and raise some questions about some of those things. And so the first part of this session will be firstly led by Robert Fitzgerald and then by Abel Rizvi, who will speak to us briefly about these issues, and then the panel will join us up here and our conversation will continue. As with the earlier session, it's intended to try and elicit some meaningful engagement engagement between us and both the speakers and the panellists, but most importantly, to try and get some insights that from the consumer side we can take away and factor into our thinking and action. And dare we also suggest that we might attempt to leave with regulators and policymakers also the hope that they might get some new insights into the constraints facing those on the consumer side. Many of you will have formed the view from the earlier session that there are no financial constraints on ACCAN. I'd mention just this factoid. The combined budgets of the three regulators who made that comment exceed ours by a factor of 150 times. So let me now introduce Robert to make some remarks.